Welcome, everybody. Let's start with opening prayer. Dear God in heaven, thank you for giving us another day of life and the beginning of a new week. Thank you for giving us the message of equality and help us to be able to understand the lesson we have for today. Help us to be ready to teach the Levites and help us to keep all the message, all the understandings and the methodology in our heads so we can teach others to use the methodology. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. Welcome everybody to the Youth Prophecy Group. This is meeting number 92 and today is November 21st, 2021. The title of this week's lesson is Feminism.
So, manual says there's no volume.
So you might want to log out and log
You can't
back
hear
in.
us. So, let's see, try.
G7.
And I know. Mary, can you hear us? Can you hear us, Mary?
Tell her to put in.
Well, we're just gonna keep going. Really grateful. Okay, let's
start. The title of today's lesson is Feminism, the Three Waves.
Previous to 1989, there were three important movements. There was the Civil Rights Movement, which fought for racial equality. There was second wave feminism, which fought for gender equality. And then there was Stonewall, which fought for LGBTQ plus equality. Even though the formalization dealt with the LGBTQ plus equality, we still have things to learn regarding gender equality. And in this part one of this two-part series, because we're going to be doing two parts on this subject, we're going to be looking at the three waves of feminism, when they took place, what events sparked their beginning and end.
First wave feminism. The first wave of feminism began roughly in the year 1848. In 1848, there was a convention in New York. It is called the Seneca Falls Convention today, but at the time it was called the Women's Rights Convention. It was the first convention of its kind. This convention was only 2 days long, the 19th and 20th of July. It was not advertised wisely, yet around 300 people were present when the convention started. On the first day, only women were allowed to join, but everyone was welcome the second day, and the second day, even some men spoke. The convention was organized mostly by Elizabeth C. Stanton and Lucretta Mott. They met in 1840 when they were not allowed into the World Anti-Slavery Convention in London. So they weren't allowing women and they weren't to go, but they were barred. Mary McClintock and Mary Coffin Wright, which was Mott's sister, along with Jane Hunt, which was in Clinton's family, they were also involved in organizing the convention.
I'm going to start over the paragraph for here, Mary.
Someone new just came. Okay, I'll start over. The first wave of feminism began roughly in the year 1848. In 1848, there was a convention in New York, and it's called the Seneca Falls Convention today, but in the past it was called the Women's Rights Convention. It was the first convention of its kind. This convention was only 2 days long on the 19th and 20th of July. It was not advertised widely, yet around 300 people were present when it started. On the first day, only women were allowed to join, but on the second day, anybody was welcome, and some men even spoke that day. The convention was organized mostly by Elizabeth C. Stanton and Lucretta Mott, and they had met in 1840 when they were barred from attending the World Anti-Slavery Convention in London. They were also helped by Mary McClintock, Mary Coffin Wright, which was Mott's sister, and Jane Hunt, which was in McClintock's family. All of these women were abolitionists. Stanton was the main writer behind the Declaration of Sentiments, which was the main point of the convention. That document is modeled very closely after the Declaration of Independence. On the first day, she read the Declaration, and it has two parts. The first part has 19 injustices that women faced at the time, like the fact that they were basically denied an education and the fact that any money they earned belonged to their husbands. The second part was 12 resolutions or things that the women wanted in order to fix the injustices that were previously stated. On the second day of the convention, the 12 resolutions were voted on. 11 of them passed unanimously, but one didn't, and that was Resolution 9. Resolution 9 was about the right to vote, and many people didn't like that idea, so the resolution barely passed. The convention was ridiculed because of that resolution, but the Declaration of Sentiments continued to be used by them, and suffrage or the right to vote became the main point of this movement. On August 2nd, also that same year, 1848, the convention convened again to affirm what they had agreed on in the first convention. For decades after that, the suffragettes continued to fight for their right to vote and for other rights. So the first wave feminism began with the Seneca Falls Convention in 1844, and that is a picture of some of the women that were present. 1848, sorry. And that's a picture of some of the women that were present.
The first wave of feminism ended in 1920. On August 18, 1920, the United States Congress passed the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. The 19th Amendment said, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." It didn't single out white women, but Black women still weren't able to vote due to discrimination. Voting. After the ratification of the 19th Amendment, the momentum of the first wave began to dwindle. For many, the 19th Amendment was the major legislative achievement they have been fighting for. That's from Women's History.
Second wave feminism. The second wave of feminism began in 1963. The second wave of feminism was a fight against the domesticity of women after World War II. During the war, about 350,000 American women joined the military. They became nurses, repaired airplanes, drove trucks, and performed other jobs in the military, as well as other jobs outside the military, so just, like in factories and stuff. But after the war, the sexism set in. Men expected women to return to working in the home while they handled all the business outside the home. This is what we call domesticity. In 1961, President Kennedy formed the, quote, President's Commission on the Status of Women, and that is PCSW. This commission was chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt, and it gave the government a motivation to take gender equality in legislation seriously. However, the formation of the PCSW is not marked as the beginning of the second wave of feminism. That title is reserved for the book The Feminine Mystique in 1963. And in the picture, we have the cover of the book. So in 1963, Betty Friedman published a book titled The Feminine Mystique. The book argued against the post-World War II idea or belief that women found fulfillment in domestic life, being housewives. So the post-World War belief was that women didn't want to continue working outside of the home, but they just wanted to go back in the home. So the book argued against this. She described how this was wasted women's potential, and among the women she surveyed, many of them were dissatisfied. This Friedman called the problem that has no name. That's a quote. The Feminine Mystique was also a bestseller. It was translated into over 12 languages and sold more than 3 million copies in the author's lifetime. This book is what began the second wave of feminism, when people began to fight for equality. Some of the victories of second wave feminism include the Equal Pay Act of 1963 and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So the second wave feminism movement began in 1963 with the book The Feminine Mystique.
1968 and 1970 protests. In second wave feminism, there were a lot of protests that mainly women did for their rights. One of the major protests took place in 1968 in the middle of second wave feminism. In 1968, there was a beauty pageant that was going to be held in New Jersey. It was called the Miss America pageant. A group of about 13 women who were radical feminists, which we will discuss in next week's lesson, not next week's, in the next lesson, but a group of 13 women, they were called New York Radical Women. In New York, they lived in New York, and they would meet and talk about all the sexism in their lives, as well as the sexism that they saw around them. One day, someone brought up the upcoming pageant, and they decided to organize a protest against the pageant because they could see the sexism that was being promoted in it. It was the first protest that they had organized and thought of completely by themselves. They talked with news stations, and they gave out leaflets to tell everyone about the protest. And when they got to the bus station where they had rented 2 buses to take women from New York to New Jersey, they found about 300 women there, so they had to rent more buses. They had the protest right outside the building where the pageant was, and when they arrived, there was already a large, diverse group of women from across the country who had came to join them. The pageant was on September 7th, and it was hot, and they stood out all day, waving signs, as you can see in the picture, giving out leaflets and buttons, and throwing beauty products into the freedom trash can. They even had a real sheet representing the women in the pageant, how they were just being told what to do. While the pageant was happening and while it was live on TV, they also sent in a few women who went into the balcony and then hung over a large banner that said Women's Liberation, so everyone could see it. 2 years later, there was another pageant and another protest by feminists. In 1970, the Miss World pageant took place in London. The women that organized the protest were part of a group called Britain's Women's Liberation Movement. They weren't that many that came up with the plan, and although women have protested outside the Miss World's pageants before, this time they wanted to get inside. The day of the pageant, some unrelated groups set off a bomb there, but the pageant still went on. About 60 women brought tickets, dressed up so they could fit in, and went to the pageant. They planned to throw rotten vegetables, flower bombs, and leaflets on the stage when all the contestants were on there at the same time. This event was live on TV as well, and over 100 million people were watching from all over the world. But during the event, the host was being so sexist, calling women cows, that one of the protesters just started shouting. She stood up and she started throwing whatever she had brought over the balcony. Soon, all of the other protesters followed. They were, of course, quickly escorted from the building, but they had succeeded in disrupting the pageant. So both of these protests in 1968 and 1970 happened in the history of the second wave of feminism as women were fighting for their rights. And like I said earlier, that is some of the women protesting in 1968 in front of the Miss America pageant.
In 1989, the term intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. According to the Oxford Dictionary, intersectionality means the interconnected nature of social categorized such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. Basically, it's the concept that the problems a white woman faces are not the same as a Black woman. And why is that? Because there are levels of discrimination and they overlap. From the example above, a white woman faces sexism, but a Black woman faces not only sexism, but racism as well, which is something that the white woman will never face. There's also the issue of homosexuality. A Black heterosexual woman will not face the same issues as a Black homosexual woman. The former will experience racism and sexism, while the latter will experience racism, sexism, and homophobia. That's what intersectionality is pointing out that there are multiple levels of discrimination, and the discrimination one class of people experience can be totally different from that of another, even if they're the same race or gender. And these are just some examples of different levels of discrimination.
1989. The second wave of feminism ended in 1989. In 1982, there was an accounting firm called Price Waterhouse. Ann Hopkins, who was in the picture, worked there as a senior manager in the Office of Partnership. And in 1982, she proposed for partnership. Hopkins was praised by other partners as being an outstanding professional and had a strong character, independence, and integrity. But despite this, her partnership was put on hold for a year. Ann Hopkins met with the supervisor of her department and was asking why she was denied partnership, and the supervisor's name was Thomas Bayer. And he said to increase her chances of getting partnership, she needed to, quote, walk more femininely, talk more femininely, dress more femininely, wear makeup, have her hair styled, and wear jewelry. He told her this because she didn't conform to feminine stereotypes. Some of her co-workers described her as aggressive, foul-mouthed, demanding, and impatient with other staff members. Hopkins resigned from the firm after she was rejected for the second year and then sued the firm, saying they violated her rights under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. The district court ruled that she was indeed discriminated against, but the court didn't arrange for her to receive any compensation because of her poor relationship skills that contributed to her denial of partnership. But this case was then affirmed by the Court of Appeals, but this time they said that Price Waterhouse wouldn't be responsible if they could prove that they wouldn't have given Hopkins partnership even if they hadn't discriminated. This case went then to the Supreme Court, and on May 1st, 1989, the court ruled in Hopkins' favor. They concluded that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act outlawed discrimination. So Title VII of the Civil Rights Act outlaws discrimination based on whether somebody is a man or woman. But the court concluded that that also includes gender stereotyping. This was a landmark decision, and it further outlawed sexism. Previously, we saw how the second wave of feminism began in 1963, and in 1989, the second wave ended when feminists got what they were fighting for, which was greater equality.
Third wave feminism. The third wave of feminism began right after the second wave ended. It began roughly in 1991. In 1991, the first African-American U.S. Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall, said he would retire in June. That meant that the current president, which was George H.W. Bush, had to nominate another justice to the court. So Bush nominated Clarence Thomas, a conservative African-American lower court judge, to take Marshall's place. By the way, Marshall was a liberal. After the president nominates someone to the court, they have to go to a group in the U.S. Senate called the Senate Judiciary Committee, and that group has to approve that person by a vote. Then the whole Senate has to vote to approve that person before they're actually part of the U.S. Supreme Court. But after Thomas was nominated, senators started to hear stories about a woman. Her name was Anita Hill, and she was a law professor in the state of Oklahoma. Hill said that she had been sexually harassed by Thomas when she had worked for him. Over the summer, Some people working in the Senate contacted her a few times to see what happened, but she wanted to stay anonymous but she had wanted to stay anonymous. Also, the leader of the Senate Judiciary Committee didn't want her story to be considered when they were deciding if they wanted to vote for Clarence Thomas or not. That leader was Joe Biden, and he wanted to focus on Thomas's work, not on Thomas's character. Then it was suggested that she report to the FBI in the United States what had happened, and they would investigate and give their findings to the Judiciary Committee. She agreed to do that, and she also gave them her name. And the FBI, they did investigate, but they didn't find anything. They were like, nothing happened. So, She also sent a statement to the committee about what had happened because she wanted them to hear her own words. Biden did not give her statement to the committee until hours before they voted, and the Republicans on the committee didn't even read it till days after they had voted. So they basically ignored her. And Clarence Thomas was approved by the committee, so now he would go to the whole Senate to vote. But before the whole Senate voted, some newspapers found out about Anita Hill and they spilled her story out to the public. So the Democrats in the Senate delayed the vote for a little bit to allow her to have a hearing. Biden called Hill and told her that she would speak before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and so she went to Washington, D.C. in October. Okay. The hearing happened on October 11th, 1991. Biden gave the opening statement, but before the hearing, he had compromised, of course, and he had agreed to allow Clarence Thomas to speak both before and after Anita Hill spoke. So after he gave the opening statement, Thomas spoke, and he was upset at Biden, one, for not saying he was a good man, and of course, he was also upset at Anita Hill for even accusing him in the first place. He attacked her before she even said anything. Hill spoke next, and she told her story of the harassment she had faced working under Thomas. She was alone in the room, as you can see from the picture. Well, she was alone in the room, and that's a picture of her. And that was for a while until they allowed her family to come in, as she was still testifying. She said Thomas was not fit to be on the Supreme Court and to be a Supreme Court justice. The Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee attacked her. They said that she was basically lying, and some even said that she was delusional. Biden did nothing to protect her, and the Republicans made it clear that they wouldn't listen to him even for what he did say. Thomas spoke after, of course, and he denied everything that Hill said. Hill was in no way given a fair hearing. In the following days, other people testified both for and against Hill. And on October 15th, Clarence Thomas was approved by the Senate anyway. When people, especially women, saw how Anita Hill was treated in this hearing, saw how Anita Hill was treated in his hearing, they were upset. They were angered. That year began the third wave of feminism, when women began fighting to change the mindset of society, where things like stories of sexual harassment are either not believed or treated as though they are not important.
In 2006, Tarana Burke founded the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement was initially formed to connect survivors of harassment and assault with others who've gone through the same thing. The term was reintroduced in 2017 by Alyssa Milano, and it went viral on social media with over 10 million people using the hashtag. The Me Too movement succeeded in sending powerful people to jail for sexual assault. One such example is Harvey Weinstein, who was a millionaire film producer who was accused of harassment and was sued. But he was released in July of this year after being sentenced to 23 years in jail last year. The Me Too movement also led states to banning non-disclosure agreements, which hampered the criminals from silencing their victims. The movement also led to the creation of the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund, which provided survivors looking to sue their attackers with a legal team. The Me Too movement is part of feminism because it supports women fighting for their rights against harassment and discrimination.
In summary, so we looked over the first, second, and third waves of feminism. The first wave began in 1848 with the Seneca Falls Convention, which was a women's rights meeting. The first wave ended in 1920 with the 19th Amendment, which allowed women to have the right to vote. The second wave began in 1963 with the Feminine Mystique book published, which fought against the domesticity of women after World War II. And then in 1968 and 70, there were two beauty pageants which were protested by feminists because they saw that the pageants were sexist. The second wave ended in 1989, where we saw Price Waterhouse versus Hopkins case decided in favor of Hopkins, which showed that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act outlawed gender stereotyping. And we also saw the phrase intersectionality coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. And that is basically showing how there were different levels of discrimination. Then we saw 1991 where Clarence Thomas was nominated, even though he was being accused by by women. But since the Congress was sexist, they didn't care about anything Anita Hill said, and they nominated him anyway. So we can see the sexism there, and that began the third wave of feminism. And that is still currently going on right now, but we also saw in 2006 how the Me Too movement began, which also is fighting against sexism. So these are the three waves of feminism. And we're going to talk more about feminism in part 2 of this series.
So does anybody have any questions or comments on the lesson? You can say it or type it in the chat. I just do have one comment that we are saying 3 ways of feminism. Some people do say there are 4 ways, and they make the 4th wave being current. So Me Too movement would be the 4th wave, and Anita Hill would have been the 3rd wave. But we're saying it's 3. Some people do say it's 4 if you do look it up.
Yeah, in the movement, we like 3, like modern Israel, Millerites, 1888 art history, we kind of like 3s.
So now it is quiz time. You can unmute and say the answers, or you can put them in the chat. This quiz is from the lesson for this, what we just did. When was the first wave of feminism? Eric asked, why were women treated badly?
Because of sexism, since after Eden, sexism has just been introduced. There's no real reason why, but it's just what people do.
It's just been, since, maybe not, since Eve was put in subjection, and then after that, people got more evil. It just made it worse and worse and worse for women, and now it's just so ingrained, it's everywhere. What was the question?
The first question was, when was the first wave of feminism? You're welcome.
Yeah.
Eric said E.
And that is correct. The first wave of feminism was from 1848 to 1920. Next question. When was the second wave of feminism? That is correct. The second wave of feminism was from 1963 to 1989. The next question. What did radical feminists protest in the second wave of feminism that we talked about? What did radical feminists protest in the second wave of feminism? Yes, they protested beauty pageants. The next question. Intersectionality is about the different layers of discrimination. True or false? Is intersectionality about the different layers of discrimination? Yes, that is correct. It is about the different layers of discrimination. And the last question. When did the third wave of feminism begin? When did the third wave of feminism begin? And that is correct. The third wave of feminism began in 1991. So you got all the questions correct. Correct.
So thank you everybody for coming. If you want notes, have questions about the notes or the message in general, if you want updates or recordings, you can contact us at youthprophecygroup@gmail.com. Also a reminder, we have a new website, youthprophecygroup.org, so you can find all the notes and videos and everything on that website. And the next meeting will be on December 5th, 2021.
Let's close with prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for letting us be able to understand history and to see where we are in time. Thank you for giving us the truth about sexism and how we are not to practice it. Please continue to be with us this upcoming week. And thank you for providing for all of our needs and for keeping us safe. In Christ's name, amen.
Thank you for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for coming.
Bye.
Bye.